looking forward to learn from you as well.
Likewise.
Okay, now our meeting is now streaming live. You can go ahead and share your presentation with us.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you guys for having me on board. My name is Mhako. I'm an entrepreneur based in Zimbabwe. I've got interest in Angola and South Sudan. Basically, what do? I help businesses, startups, and established companies, refine their strategy for better access to markets as well as finance. Yeah, so that's pretty much about me. So yeah, I'm joining you today to speak about startups beyond the cliche, because I do consult for quite a lot of startups and sort of come to understand some of the challenges that local Zimbabwean startups do encounter in as far as, whether it's their go-to-market strategy, whether it's refining their business model so that there's, product market fit, or just generally, day-to-day running of the business, making sure that there's a repeatable, scalable approach to the business, that it's, like I said, that it's repeatable, it's profitable, and it's worth scaling. Yeah, so one of the challenges that I often encounter, or one of the challenges that my clients often encounter, the businesses that I consult for, the startup that I consult for, one of the challenges that they often encounter is, trying to validate, the work that they're doing. And more often than not, when they approach you, they're much more concerned about how little you're going to get out from the engagement, as well as how soon you can exit the picture. Recently, I was approached by a tech company, and they thought they were market ready. They thought, the next thing was just, going to the market and get the money. But I had to take them a little bit backwards to try and find out how much homework they had done to try and build their business. So what I've done today is I've compiled a few, ideas around, startups beyond the cliche, as my topic suggests, that I want to share with you. Yeah, I'm just gonna go right into it. One of the reasons that I've, one of the biggest obstacles that I've found when dealing with African startups has been what I would term big headline syndrome. You've all read of startups, the hype, behind the idea, where as soon as you come up with an idea, the next thing you want the media coverage, you want media hype, you want, the market space or the media space to celebrate you. And one of the challenges that I've actually found with that is that the minute that you step out into the media space with your idea, you are under pressure to drive it in a certain direction. And more often than not, that direction might not necessarily tally what the market expectation is. So the big headline syndrome is one such stumbling block that I've seen that has sort of resulted in most Zimbabwean startups not realizing their full potential. One day you're trying to do the solution, the next day, there's so much media attention and media hype around your product. Whilst it is important to have that media attention, it is much more important to have the attention of your customers, behind you. So now that I've mentioned customers, it actually leads me to one of the biggest challenges that I've seen with most of the startups that I engage, that they are not aware who they're going to be serving as a customer. They've got what I would term, the big idea syndrome again. The big idea syndrome says, I've got this brilliant idea, I can take it to market, I'm going to get 1% of the market space. And more often than not, 1% of the market is actually a huge, chunk of the market, and it takes a lot of work to even get 0.5% of the market. So the big idea syndrome says, I've got this idea figured out. I've got this idea that I've actually converted into a business model or a business plan, and my business plan can actually reach a point where it is perfect. And once I build that supposedly perfect business plan, I can take it to market, and the market will buy into it. And what that does is that more often than not, you then begin to overvalue your idea. One, in terms of valuation, and then secondly, you begin to overstate the impact that your idea is going to have in the market space that you want to operate in. And more often than not, it sort of hinders you from thinking in terms of how far and wide or how deep the idea could actually be examined before it is actually taken to market and it becomes market ready. So some of those issues that I've mentioned above relate to, one, the idea, two, the media, or, becoming involved at a very early stage where you are hyped up as maybe the next big thing, and people talk about you, but ultimately you actually know that the business is actually not moving in the direction that you want. And I remember when I started one of my businesses, I had a manufacturing plant. And when I started that business, there was a lot of talk amongst friends, peers, and so forth. But unfortunately, I soon discovered that there's no customer archetype called friend, there's no customer archetype called peer. All of these people, no matter how much they would hype me up, as long as the market was not actually buying from me, then it was all like your vanity matrix numbers that make sense to the world, but they don't make absolutely no sense to you, the business owner, and to the business itself. And sometimes they actually put you in a depressing space where you're depressed. There's a lot of talk about you, but there's not really, sufficient talk in the minds of your customers to justify the existence of the business in itself. Yeah. So I think I just need to not what else I wanted to talk about today. Yeah. So I wanted to actually even talk about the building your business in itself. Building your business takes a lot of effort. And before you even build your business, there's a lot of work that goes into it. For example, you need to discover who your customers are. You need to validate your customers, probably through testing whether the market will be able to buy. And once you've validated the existence of the customers, you need to actually start creating the customers. Who are your own particular customers who will take your business forward? Ultimately, businesses rise and fall on the account of whether there is there's a ready buyer. There's someone who's willing to pay for what it is that you are taking to market. So all other stakeholders, whilst they are equally important, the most important in my view would be your customer. The other important stakeholders are probably your co-founder, the person who comes in initially when you're starting up. More often than not, when we start our businesses with people who may be our peers, our friends, and so forth, there's usually a temptation to say, whoever started with me gets 50% of the business or gets equal shareholding of the business. Whereas in actual fact, sometimes some of the people that you start your business with are not necessarily supposed to be your partners in the long term. They could be people who are supposed to come in, consult for a particular type of service. They offer you that service, you benefit from the service, they benefit from whatever it is they're supposed to get from it, and then they exit the same. So often than not, the people that we invite initially to have a discussion with around the business itself, around the startup itself, we are tempted to say, you come in, you get this much equity into the project. But half the time that equity is not even associated to any form of risk being taken, any form of activity, any form of effort, any form of energy being applied, any form of intellect being applied. It's just a matter of who is with me when we are starting. So those are some of the common startup mistakes that I've actually found. And often I do engage with these entrepreneurs, then come to me and say, you know what, we started a business with XYZ, and now I'm trying to help them out of the picture because they're probably not pulling in the same direction. They're probably not seeing the vision the same way that I was seeing it from the onset, and they're not probably adding the kind of value that I anticipated they'll be able to add. Yeah. So, but anyway, today I thought maybe let's have the session. I talked to you about some of these basic things, startups, beyond the cliche of the headlines, beyond the cliche of the hyped up idea, beyond the cliche of a lot of the things that I've mentioned. So I hope we can have a question and answer segment because I want this to be much more interactive than probably it is right now. So Faith, I don't know if there's anything else that that we can speak about.
Okay, thank you, Tad. I think the audience can also post in the chat box and we get this to be more interactive. You're mentioning most of the startups, they come to consult from you, and you have highlighted a lot of mistakes that they do. And the one that caught my attention mostly was the one whereby the people you start with usually think they should also get a shareholder, a shares from the same business. But my question is, how do you tell this person deserves some shares in this one is just a once-off thing? Then we separate it that way. How do you tell between the two?
Yeah, so there are a lot of ways of telling between the two. I mean, I mentioned the process of actually trying to build the business. That the best way to actually try to build your business is first to do a customer discover who your customer is. Secondly, validate the existence of that customer. And then once you've validated the existence of that customer, you start creating your own customer base. Then you're on your way to building a business. So more often than not, before we've even done all of these things, before we've even exhausted our mind and applied our minds to what do I exactly need to do in order to build this solution, we already think we need someone on board. And when we think we need someone on board, we are more likely tempted to bring on board people that we know or people that we've had, they're able to do certain things. But the minute you do that, your business is undervalued at the point of inception. When the business is still in its early stage, its valuation is purely, I often say an idea is worth half a penny until executed. So when I come in to your idea, often than not, I'm going to claim a stake in it. But as the idea evolves, there's going to be much more work required. So once you've scoped out how much work is required to actually bring the idea to a point where it can be taken to market, then maybe it may be ideal for you to slow down a little bit, breathe a little bit before bringing anyone else on board. But when you do bring that person on board, make sure that they're actually adding the kind of value that you want. And as you project the business into the future, see what possibilities there could be in terms of the growth prospects and what kind of new capital in terms of your financial capital you may need, your capital in terms of intellectual capital, capital in terms of skills. You need all of these types of capital, whether it's social capital and things like that. So you have to project yourself into, a couple of steps down the line and say, how much more of this will I need? So that if it's a skill that you're bringing in, how much more of that skill will you need up until a point where the business is mature enough to actually start commanding, an audience in the marketplace, start commanding or start having an ability to even attract capital as it stands. So once you do that, you will have a bit of restraint in terms of how generous you can be about equity and stake in your business. Because some people end up struggling to fundraise, because the minute they've added someone, that someone comes in, they get 50% of the business. A couple of months down the line, they discover they have to, seed more equity to a third party and things like that. So I would also suggest that even if you are starting, leave the bulk of your equity unissued. So when you register your company, if you've got, assuming you're registering it, say in Zimbabwe, and you've got, say, 2,000 ordinary shares, supposedly, preserve some. Maybe you have 40% of those ordinary shares, retained for some future, growth, and make it known to whoever you are bringing on board that, what, I own, say, 50% of the business. I'm only able to let go of 10 or 20% of the business, and then we retain the other 30% for future expansion. That sort of gives you a leeway in terms of when you do really need the capital, or when you do really need to bring someone else on board. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I am answered. Anyone from the audience who need to ask something? Okay, Chad, you mentioned something about the big idea syndrome. I wanted to ask on that one. There's that time where you have this idea, and the moment you just put it out there, you have a lot of customers or a lot of attention from the customers. Then you try to expand it, then 2 months down the line, it flops and all. Is that due to the big idea syndrome, or is just the market wise?
Well, so part of the process that I mentioned earlier in terms of developing a business, what happens is that the minute you think you have an idea, there's obviously a temptation to overvalue its impact or its potential impact on the marketplace. So what then happens is that you are tempted to launch the idea before you've even tried to validate, it's how big, for example, if it's a market need, you say to yourself, you know what, there's a market need that's this big, right? And because you've just said to yourself there's a market need that is that big, when you do then go into the market space, you discover that probably there's no need to be solving. Some of the ideas that are not being tackled by businesses are deliberately not being tackled because they are not businesses. So not every brilliant idea amounts to a business. Some of the ideas are actually just, they're not. There's no economic opportunity. They don't make sense from a business point of view to be solving. I'll give you an example. I recently got an inquiry from one of a potential client, and they had this brilliant idea. And when we then began to sort of critique and try and discover, whether the idea was actually going to be repeatable, profitable, and scalable, we then discovered that the person who had come up with the idea could not, quantify the size of the problem. So sometimes when you don't quantify, the size of the problem, you are bound to have one or two, three of your friends saying, you know what, this is brilliant. But when you then take it to a sizable market chunk, you discover that it was only brilliant to three of your friends, maybe because they were being kind to you, maybe they wanted to be nice to you. But you take it to the real marketplace, you discover that they may not necessarily be a genuine need. Even if there was, they may not necessarily be, that product market fit, who can actually afford. And because the assumption is this, the income that your market space has is limited, right? They've got, if they're earning $100, it's limited to $100. If they're earning $1,000, it's limited to $1,000. So there's so much that they can actually do with that $1,000 or $100. And if your product or service is not actually in a priority to them, no matter how brilliant it can actually be, it will not be bought. So part of the whole, customer discovery, customer validation, customer creation process is meant to refine your idea. And sometimes the idea in itself may be brilliant, maybe it just needs to be tweaked a little bit. And the market, the assumption that we have to carry is that we don't know as much as the market does, because ultimately the market is responsible for carrying the business through. So once you carry that assumption, you then take your idea to the market and try to test it in terms of how far can the idea go in the market space. Because the minute you launch it before you've actually done that, chances are you discover that you discover certain things about the market space, and by then you would have probably spent money, and pivoting may actually become difficult. So I think
yeah.
I think my last question would be, is there a time frame for validating your product in the market?
Well, I don't think it's actually time-based. I think it's activity-based. If you can achieve your, whether it's customer discovery, whatever, if you can achieve that in the shortest possible time, then good for you. So it's not necessarily time bound. It's actually how much have you covered? How much work have you covered? How many potential customers have you sort of spoken to, and how big has your sample been? So if you can do your sample in a day and get the kind of feedback, and it's also not written in stone. In some instances, you may not even do all of the things that I've mentioned, but you still find that there's actually a genuine market for what you're trying to achieve. And before even doing all the things that I've mentioned, you can actually achieve success. But here's the thing: when you're trying to build a startup, like the parameters are unknown. It's not like you're jumping into an established organization where the parameters are known, the market space is known. A startup, it's an untested hypothesis, right? So part of your work in building the startup, building beyond the cliche, is actually to test the hypothesis, to say whether there's any validity to your claims. And so yeah, it has nothing to do with how much time one takes. It has everything to do with how much ground one is able to cover. It would be nice in the shortest possible period of time, but if it takes longer, for as long as it takes, as long as by the time that you take your idea to the market, it will find acceptance, then yeah, good for you.
Okay, thank you so much, Chad.
Thank you.
Anyone from the audience who has a question, you can go ahead and ask.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to Chad there, and I wish I knew Chad way before 2019, to be specific, because we really got excited with an idea, and we ended up paying a very huge bill because of it. Of course, we call it an expensive lesson. We learned a very expensive lesson. We rapidly prototyped, deployed in the market, started incurring all these monthly obligations for cloud storage, and not even a single paying client. It was, we had to start again from the beginning. To now, okay, we have to do customer personnel, we have to do customer interviews. And so if I had known this before 2019, we would not have lost money. Like I said, it was an expensive lesson. We still have the lesson, and we can, we can build on it, but it was an expensive lesson indeed.
Absolutely. It's one of the common challenges. It comes down to maybe hiring staff before you actually know what exactly they'll be doing. Getting an office, getting capital. It comes down to a lot of things. I meet a lot of people. They think it's the office that will get the money flowing in. They think it's the having a reception desk that will get the money flowing in. It's the newspaper article that says watch out for Chad. That's gonna get the money flowing in. But it's none of that. I mean, we it's only it's the basics, really. It's the basics that really get us going. But yeah, it's those expensive mistakes that help us grow. I'll give you an example. When we started manufacturing business, we made tons and tons of product, tied our money into this product. Went for 3 months, we couldn't even sell one unit, and you learn from those things. You realize, oh my word, how to manage your cash flows, how to do all of those things. But the most important thing.
What you think will bring the money is what will be taking the money out.
Yes, absolutely. So it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of you have to invest in actually first and foremost, being involved in the business in itself, and avoiding the temptation of distractions. Like for me, I found the media space to be the most distractive one, because before you know it, they're saying, watch out for Chad, and you're like, what are they watching out for? And they're putting all this unnecessary pressure on you, and before you know it, you're being listed, on one of those fancy lists, and they're saying, this startup is, and you've seen it, tons of those startups that are listed, and
Yes.
yeah.
They are covered on newspaper. Now I've seen also some who go to the, they got extra mile when they have to even to pay a media house to say, please, can you write our story? Like where not even the normal way the journalist comes and asks some questions to come up with a story. They'll be given, say, please put it out like this. Then whatever needs to be paid, so people will be celebrating.
Yeah, so you get those vanity, I like to call them vanity metrics, numbers that make sense to the world but don't make sense to your business. They make absolutely no sense to your business.
They're called vanity what?
Vanity matrix.
Yes.
Vanity.
Yes, nice to have numbers. Nice to have numbers, but they don't get your bills paid.
I want to capture that one. Numbers that make sense to the world or to the, but does not make sense to your business.
Absolutely, and you see, the most important type of attention that one must get is from the customers. Really, it's nice to have the media. It's nice to have being listed and all that, but it's nice. It's nicer to have your customers paying and being willing to help you grow. So this is how you can actually then build the business beyond the cliche of I don't know.
Okay.
If you'll indulge me, I have a question that's coming up from what Stephen was also saying, and a lot of what you're saying. And I love the topic, business beyond the cliche of startups. Because I think more and more we have made startups like a cliche, like, oh, they're an entrepreneur, they're a startup, right? And more often than not, we're not asking the simple question: are you making money? Right?
Absolutely.
And if you're making money, can you at least use that money to take you from point A to point B? However, I think every business has a time, right? And I have a question that speaks to the proof of concept phase of a business, right? At this point where the business is not really making any money, you're probably investing into the business, sweat equity, startup capital. I think it's an important phase, but how do you manage that in an environment like Zimbabwe, where my personal resources would already be stretched, but you are in a space where you need to do a POC for your investors, for yourself, to validate your market concept? So how would you advise entrepreneurs and startups as they go through POC? What are some of the cost-effective methodologies or approaches to running a POC for your business concept or idea?
Yeah, personally, I'm a huge fan of any lean type of startup methodology, one that allows you to start with as little let me put it, financial resources as possible. So that doesn't mean you're not investing your time, you're not investing your energy, you're not investing your skills. You could be, investing all of those things. But like I highlighted, I mean, building a startup is a different ballgame altogether. The parameters are not known. It's not like being involved in an existing company where all the parameters, everything else is known and predefined. So as a result of that, there's a lot of risk that one has to take. But in time to make sure that you strike a balance between the little resources that you want to sort of commit, financial resources in this case that you want to commit, or and also getting market feedback. I don't know at what stage you can say, I have a minimum viable product. And often before you get to that stage, I mean, there's the basics of customer discovery are that, you are probing into the market space with a whole set of questions that help you probe. And some of them don't necessarily need to be direct to say, if I provide the solution, will you buy it? Because those are, questions that lead people to a certain response. I mean, your friend will obviously tell you they'll buy. And if you ask a couple of people, they'll tell you they'll buy because, they're sitting right across you. They want to be nice to you. But you have to find a way of actually, structuring your questions in such a manner that you harness the right kind of feedback. So I think it comes down to what kind of questions are you asking to the market as you probe. And as you build, say, that minimum viable product, what kind of features are necessary to sort of get the right. Let me use the word feedback loosely here, but yeah, sort of what kind of features are necessary to help you get the necessary feedback. So it could be a very basic, so to speak, if it's your prototype, whatever, it could be a very basic, product or service that you take to market and you test it at that level. And you make these gradual, small but incremental steps. The temptation is always to say, let me launch big, let me give them the best of what I can get. But if you look at all the solutions that have actually come to become, some of the world-renowned solutions, they never started out as being the best of what they could be. There was a lot of they went with a I'll use minimum viable product again. They went with a minimum viable product onto the market space. They harnessed feedback. They came back. But what happens is that the minute you do that, you have actually increased even the value of the business. Like I mentioned earlier, an idea is worth half a penny until executed. But once it is executed, the further you move away from the inception phase, the more value your business or an idea is likely to get. So the more likely you are able to raise financing for it. But the more you tie yourself around, launching the best of what you can give to the market space, the more difficult it becomes for you to actually then launch. And maybe by the time you take your product to market, you've spent a lot of money, so much that soliciting even for the right feedback becomes even a tall order altogether.
Wow, Chad, that's a lot. It's a lot of very valuable information, and I think perhaps for us, this is what Harare Startup Week is all about. I know you asked earlier, what is the whole idea of Harare Startup Week? It's bringing the ecosystem together to have these very candid, very frank conversation from people that are starting up enterprises in Zimbabwe, because a lot of the times you talk about startup as a generic term. Yet when we are in different jurisdictions, the experiences, the regulatory framework, the environment, the financiers are very different, right? In our capacity in Zimbabwe, we don't have angel investors. In other jurisdictions, angel investors are in plenty, in their plenty numbers. So it becomes very interesting for me when we have these conversations for entrepreneurs and their enterprises to say, look, what is the minimum viable product? This big man syndrome, so important, right? Not every idea is a good idea, right? And sometimes your idea is worth nothing and you carry it around for 10 years, God knows how long, right? And you pour money into it and nothing comes out of it, right? Where does the idea of design thinking fail quickly come in, right? Some of these processes, and not everyone has access to attend training, etc. So how can we bring an ecosystem during a week to start unpacking this and seeing how technology can be resourced as well to solve some of these problems in the different genres of businesses in the entrepreneur landscape? So in a nutshell, that's what we intend to do at this inaugural Harare Startup Week. And yeah, we hope it turns into a movement, because like you said, we are only starting, and this build up is going to take us to 2021. and we continue to support the ecosystem in a sustainable way, cross-sector collaboration, etc. And see, Madam Faith is not available there. There she is. Hi, Madam Faith.
Hi, Chenesai.
So I was done with my questions and my sermons to Chad.
Okay.
Maybe we can allow Chad to close this session and to maybe give us more ideas about how we move it forward for the other entrepreneurs in the ecosystem.
Over to you, Chad.
Yeah, I want to say, thank you for having me and thank you for building this platform. I think it's necessary that, entrepreneurs find a platform where they can share their ideas, where they can share experiences, where they can learn from each other, where they can grow. For me, one of the biggest challenges that it's an Africa-wide challenge. It's, the silo mentality. We are operating in our own small corners, doing our own things, and we're not learning from other peers across. There are certain things that, you have done that I can learn from and could, sort of, smoothen the process of me building my own startup. So I think this is a necessary platform, and thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming, Chad. We've learned a lot. Chenesai. It's good to have you on the platform. You've got our next speaker.
Are we doing the speed? Are we doing the speed dial? I'm on. We're not taking an intermission. Nothing. Madam Faith.
So you allow me. I want the one for Chad to go alone. So I'm stopping this the streaming.
Okay, sir.
Then we'll start again for Chenesai. Thank you. I'm working on it.